So using mods when playing on Foundry VTT is pretty essential, or at least in my humble opinion, and these mods can sometimes drastically enhance the experience for both you and your players. And I don't know if you know this, but Foundry literally has thousands of mods available on their VTT, which is kind of crazy to think about. And what's even crazier to think about is that there are hundreds if not thousands of mod creators, each of them creating 1 or 2 mods, but there are a select few of mod creators out there that don't just create 1 or 2 mods, but instead create entire mod catalogs complete with premium mods, which require you to pay for them in order to get access to them. And in this video, we're going to be talking about one such master mod creator that goes by the name the Ripper93, whose mods always seem to land on every single top 10 Foundry VTT mod video or list. But regardless, even if you don't recognize the name the Ripper93, I would be willing to bet that you at least have heard of or maybe are even using some of his mods. The Ripper93 has created over 60 mods for Foundry VTT that range from simple and easy to use mods that enhance combat via new features and tracking tools to complicated mods that allow you to create multi-level maps or even make your games 3-dimensional. And in this video, I'm going to be covering what I consider to be some of the lesser known Ripper93 mods that I think you should consider checking out for yourself. And as a quick disclaimer, I'm not going to be going over every single one of the Ripper93 mods because, as I just mentioned, there are quite a lot of them and some of them are very intricate to say the least. So I'm just going to be showcasing some of the cool features and giving a quick tutorial on the basics of the mod as opposed to giving a full in-depth tutorial, if that makes sense. And as another quick note, I'm also going to mention that quite a few of the mods that I'm going to be covering in this video are premium mods, which means that you have to support the creator over on Patreon in order to get access to them. But speaking of premium modules, let's start off by talking about one of the Ripper93's more simpler and smaller premium modules that allows you to flip between various images and assign these images to a singular token. This mod is called Token Flip. To be more specific, Token Flip allows you to assign multiple different token images to one token, and then you can flip between them. Sometimes it does get a little wonky when a token image you're flipping to is larger or smaller than the image that you're currently on, like in this example, but that's honestly not that big of an issue in my opinion. And if you want the token flip to be faster or slower, you can adjust the speed in settings. But moving on now, this next module is one that I think will really surprise your players if you decide to use it, but can take quite a bit of time to set up if you want to do it very intricately. This is the Patrol mod. This mod allows you to set up patrol paths for your guard tokens that could even detect players and play cool sound effects when they're spotted. To achieve this, all you have to do is enable the mod, obviously, and make sure that this toggle here is highlighted. Then draw out a path using either the polygon or rectangle tool, then go into the settings for that drawing and navigate over to text, and make sure that the name has path with a capital P somewhere in the name. You can then place a token on the path, go into the token settings for whatever token you want to patrol that path, and check the box next to enable path control. Then the token should begin wandering around on its path, and if you think the token would have noticed something and it should stop its patrol, if you pause the game, it will continue its motion until its next node or joint of the route that you drew, and then it will stop moving. Then if combat begins and you want all patrols to stop where they are, they should, but you can also click the toggle patrol button to stop all patrols and then re-enable it when combat ends. Sadly, when a token is on a predetermined path like this one, it doesn't detect players, even if the box is checked in the token settings. I'm not entirely sure if this is intended or if it's a bug, but if you want to use the detect players feature, you'll have to do a slightly different setup. Like normal, you need to draw the shape of the area you want your token to patrol, but instead of making a track for your token to follow like we did previously, we're going to be making a corral or area that we want it to randomly walk around within, if that makes sense. But then once you've made your shape, you can go into the token settings and enable random patrol and spot player characters. The token will then begin wandering around until it spots a player, at which point it will begin walking towards them until they're spotted or they escape. But if a token does manage to catch a player, it pauses the game for you, which is pretty handy. And in case you're wondering, patrolling tokens also avoid colliding with walls, so you can kind of set up maybe some closets or places for your players to hide if you'd like to. And if you want to get super complicated and have multiple different guard paths, make sure that you distinguish their names and you assign a path to a token by putting it in the patrol path name section in the token settings. If you're still having troubles getting the mod to work, first double check that the shape that you drew was drawn using either the square or polygon tool. Second, make sure that the name of the shape has path somewhere in it, and that name matches the name of the path that's assigned to your token. And third, make sure that the line and text both have an opacity setting greater than 0. And finally, as a note, you can still toggle the visibility state of the drawing to make it invisible to players, and it should still work. But moving right along, this next module is one that I consider to be a standard mod in every single one of my game worlds when using Foundry VTT, because it allows me to easily and seamlessly keep track of initiative while also being able to quickly reference stats that my players and NPCs have. This is the Carousel Combat Tracker mod. This mod is the successor to another extremely popular mod called Combat Carousel that is sadly no longer being developed. But this mod does the original mod proud by adding in tons of new features and quality of life additions. To use this mod, all you have to do is toggle the combat state of the tokens you want to be in initiative, and then by default the carousel will appear at the top of your screen where you can roll for initiative by using these buttons on the side if you're a game master, or by clicking the white dice symbol in the middle of the initiative card. And then initiative is rolled automatically and is tied to the corresponding combatant seamlessly. But that's not all this mod does. You can also hover over the initiative card for your party and a window will appear that will show their attributes such as HP, armor class, speed, and spell save DC. Additionally, these little arrows right here can be used for players to kind of end their turn if they want to, or for game masters to progress the initiative order. And don't worry fellow game masters out there, a player can't hover over an initiative card and see all the attributes for an actor unless they're the observer or the owner of that actor/token. And as always, there are tons of settings that you can mess around with to completely customize your carousel however you want to, including the ability to change the alignment, location, and size of the carousel, and so much more. And speaking of so much more, this next module, which actually requires Carousel Combat Tracker in order to work, is a great way for you and your players to reference each other's stats without having to go to the player directory or without having to have a token placed on the scene that you're currently on. This is the Party HUD mod. This mod adds a party HUD to the left side of your screen that allows you to keep track of your party members' stats while adventuring. This HUD can be expanded or collapsed at any time, and if you're worried about it making your sidebar look a little weird like it does right now, if you click this button right here, it will collapse the navigation buttons and make the HUD nice and flush against the side of your screen. Some other cool features about this mod that I noticed is that if you left click one of your party members' cards on the HUD, it will pan the camera to their token on the map, as long as they have a token on the map of course. And it also shows a player's familiar if they happen to have one in a kind of Baldur's Gate-esque style. And as always, if you don't like the position or size of the HUD, you have a couple of options to choose from in the settings. This next module though is one that is really useful, especially for those of you game masters out there who really like to prep your sessions and keep a clean workspace, and perhaps are also very big Microsoft fans. This is the Taskbar mod. This mod adds a Windows-like taskbar to the bottom of your screen that adds a couple of really cool ways to organize your Foundry games. To start off, this D20 button expands this window that allows you to quickly access macros and just about anything else that you want to drag and drop into this quick items section. I personally like to use this feature to prep for my sessions by clicking and dragging journal entries, monsters, and macros into it that I know I'm going to be using during my game sessions. On top of that, my favorite part of this mod is that it adds a minimize option to all windows, which when clicked minimizes that window and puts it on your taskbar. But now moving on to the far right side of the taskbar, this little arrow allows you to create different workspaces that essentially let you save and load a series of windows. So rather than having to click through each of the tabs to get to the specific journal entry that you want and to get all your monsters set up and with all the macros and all that kind of stuff, you can use this feature to set it up where you just have to click once the next time you load into Foundry and boom. All your journal entries, monsters, and macros are all already popped up, and you can minimize them or organize them how you want, and you're all set and ready to go. But anyways, moving on, this little settings button here opens up the module settings window, which might not seem all that useful to you players, but as a game master, I find myself going to this window quite often, so I appreciate that this mod adds a quick little access button for it. But what if you have all these windows open and you want to close them all really quickly? Well, that's what this button is for, because it closes all the windows that are currently open, including the ones in your taskbar. And lastly, I believe this last button is meant to show your current FPS, but mine seem to be a little glitchy. So as you can see, this mod is extremely useful for any game masters who love to keep their games organized, and by default, this mod is only enabled for game masters. So if you want your players to be able to use it, you have to go into the module settings and enable it for players. And as one last quick note, if you happen to be using the small time or small calendar mods, there's also an option that integrates those windows into the taskbar. But moving on, these next couple of modules are ones that I'm sure will surprise you, especially if you haven't heard about them before, because when I first heard about them and saw them in play, it truly opened my mind as to what Foundry VTT is truly capable of when combined with mods. And this module is called Mastercrafted. This system-agnostic mod adds a super cool crafting feature to Foundry and allows you to create an entire crafting catalog if you want to. But if you don't want to have to go through all the blood, sweat, and tears of developing a crafting recipe book or a series of crafting recipes for tons of items, then I'd recommend downloading the Potions Crafting and Gathering mod, which adds tons of pre-made recipes and ingredients for D&D 5e into your game. As you can see, there are dozens of recipes that you can give your players access to in your own games, or you can simply use these as inspiration to create your own recipes. And in the case where you want to create your own recipe, all you have to do is go into the Recipe Manager, click Add Recipe Book, fill out the corresponding fields as desired, select who will have access to this recipe, then click your new recipe book, and click Add Recipe. Then you will be able to click and drag items into this window to create your very own crafting recipe. But let's say your players are in the wilderness and can't just walk into a store or find a merchant to purchase a recipe book from. Well then, if you go into the module settings for Mastercrafted, you can enable the Cauldron option, which allows your players to drag and drop items that they think could create a potion or item into this field here. And if they succeed, they discover a brand new recipe. But remember, with the mod as it currently is, just because a player discovers a recipe doesn't mean that they make the item when they discover it. And sometimes item recipes have tool requirements, like in this example, where we discovered how to make alchemist fire. But you can see here that it didn't add the item to my inventory because I still have to craft the item with the proper tools. And if you're not using D&D 5e as your game system, then you can still use some of these pre-made items if you want to. You'll just obviously have to tweak around some of the terminology and DCs to match whatever game system that you're currently playing. But that's not all, because at this point you may be thinking, okay, well this module is really cool I guess, but how am I even supposed to facilitate a crafting mod like this when my game system doesn't have very many random ingredients that I can kind of cobble together into a crafting system? Does that mean I have to create my own ingredients? And if that's the case, then how do I even streamline my players finding these ingredients or go foraging for them? Well, don't worry about that, because as I'm sure you've probably guessed by now, this next module, which works in tandem with Mastercrafted, allows your players to go foraging for items and supplies that they can then use in Mastercrafted to make really cool items. And this module is called Gatherer. To get started with this mod, you first have to create a journal entry, then create a page in said journal entry and give it a name. And then if you have the previously mentioned potion crafting and gathering mod installed, you will have tons of pre-made roll tables to choose from that have tons of unique crafting ingredients already in them. Or you can always make your own. From here you can input the time until the spot resets once all the pulls are exhausted, the amount of pulls you can do before the spot is exhausted and the reset timer starts, and the quantity, which just means the amount of items that you find on each pull, and the tools that you want to be required for each task. We'll cover the minigame function here in a second, so don't worry about that right now. And as far as I know, the expression section here is for if you want to set up custom checks or requirements that aren't covered in this check section that we're about to go over. And speaking of which, in this check section, you can set up if you want there to be an ability check, a tool check, or both before a player pulls for the corresponding table. And of course you can set up the DCs however you'd like depending upon how difficult you want it to be to find the ingredients in the area that your players are currently exploring. And then once you're done with all that, you can add a description or perhaps a picture of the gathering spot, and then if you set it up properly, you will be able to see all of the possible items that can be found, along with the chance of you pulling that particular item if you hover over them. And if you want to change the chance of finding one item over another, then all you have to do is just change the weight of the item on the roll table that the gathering page is currently using. But going back to that minigame option, this is for if you don't want to leave the check up to chance and instead want to leave it up to your player's reaction time and skill. So if you want to use this feature, all you have to do is remove all of the DC fields to let the mod know that you don't want to be using those anymore, and input the amount of time you want the minigame to be counting down from, and keep in mind that this is in milliseconds, not seconds. And what I mean by counting down is that the minigame gets progressively faster the longer the player waits, so the greater the number you put into the time field, the longer it takes the minigame to speed up. So for this example, I'm going to be using 10,000 to make it a fairly challenging timing-based minigame, but still easy enough so that you will most likely get the item that you want. But if you wanted to make this minigame harder or easier, you can just go back into the settings to fine-tune it to make it as difficult or as easy as you want. But as I mentioned before, if your players take too long, the minigame does become basically impossible to accurately choose an item. Next up is another system agnostic mod that takes the fairly mundane and boring act of equipping an item or armor or something like that on the VTT by clicking a little shield icon or a button that equips it and making it so much cooler and visual. This is the Paper Doll mod. Paper Doll is a mod that adds this little icon to the top of your character or NPC sheet that when clicked brings up this little side window where you can click and drag items from your inventory into their corresponding spots to equip them. And the cool thing is that once you drag something onto a slot in this window, it will automatically equip it in your inventory as well. And if you right click an item in this window, it will automatically unequip it. But as you're looking at this, you may be a little worried because depending upon your game system, there aren't enough slots on this window for all of your magic items or weapons. Well, fear not, because as always, if you go into the module settings, you can add or remove as many slots as you'd like, and you can even change the icons if desired. However, keep in mind that this window is only so big, so if you add in too many icons or too many slots, I guess, then things will get a little wonky. But anyways, this mod, while a simple one, is a pretty cool one in my opinion, because it's a great way for players to keep track of what they currently have equipped, and is a cool visual representation of all the equipment that you're currently wearing. Moving on though, this next module has a deceptively simple name, but is probably one of the best quest, journal, lore, and map keeping mods that I've ever seen on Foundry, and is really great, especially if you're a game master who likes to keep all of your notes for lore and locations and things like that all in one place without having to go to multiple different programs or go to multiple different files and go to different tabs and things like that. This is the Simple Quest mod. When you first install the mod, it will greet you with this little pop-up, and if you press J, it will begin the walkthrough of the mod starting with the Quests tab. And these walkthroughs occur the first time you open each of these tabs, which is super useful considering how much there is to this mod. But anyways, once you're done completing the tour, I would recommend going down here and changing the theme for Simple Quest. So here are a couple of examples of what each theme looks like, and what's super cool is that there are even sci-fi themes for those of you who like to run spacefaring game systems. However, my favorite theme is probably the default one because it's the easiest on the eyes in my opinion. And don't worry, if you want to change the theme, you're not stuck with it or anything, you can easily change it by clicking this little palette icon at the bottom right of the quest window, or by going into module settings. But moving on, in my opinion, this mod does a fantastic job of explaining how to use each and every tab and feature that it has, so I won't be doing a full tutorial, but I do want to showcase each of the different tabs. First and foremost, the quest tab is super easy to use and makes each quest easy to see and understand, while using a layout that will be very familiar to anyone who has ever played a Bethesda game before. But to set up a quest, all you have to do is go to Journals and create a new page in the In Progress journal and title it whatever you want. Then you'll probably want to create a heading or two to separate the different sections of your quest, add some descriptions of the task if you'd like to, and to create the checkboxes like you saw before, all you have to do is make the quest points a bulleted list, and then once saved, it will automatically make those bulleted lists a checklist in the Simple Quest window. A really cool feature of this mod is that when a new development or a new quest is posted, a classic RPG yellow exclamation point will appear next to that quest. From here as the Game Master, you can move quests to the completed or failed folders, reveal, delete, or duplicate quests, and probably one of my favorite features is that you can send a quest to chat, or mark it as updated as an easy way to remind your players or alert them that a new quest has been accepted. And by this point you've probably noticed that Simple Quest is in full screen mode by default, but if you hover over here you can actually click this button to make it windowed. But now moving on to the lore tab, there aren't any special features that come along with this particular tab, but if you're a game master who likes to keep things organized, this is a great place to put all of your lore documents and details. But now moving on to my favorite tab that this mod has to offer, the map section is so cool and has so many cool features. While you can give your players access to a scene with a map on it, this feature is awesome because it puts a fully interactable map in the same window as your quests, which means that you don't have to leave the scene that you're currently on to look at where you are on a map or to get details about some other place. And you may be thinking that the default journals that Foundry has allows you to basically do the same thing, but with this mod you can also place icons around this interactable map, make them hidden to players if desired, add a description so that when you hover over it, it will display some quick information about this point, or you can tie journal entries to an icon so that you can left click on them to get more information about that point of interest. And then if you have players who like to keep a journal, this tab allows those players to access that journal, and similarly, if the party likes to keep a collective journal, then this tab allows your players to quickly access that as well, all while staying within the same window that also has your quests, lore, and your maps. However, while this mod is great in my opinion, I do wish the quest tracking system was a little bit more customizable and did things similarly to the way that a different mod called Monk's Enhanced Journal does things. And to be more specific, with Monk's Enhanced Journal, you can tie actors, objectives, rewards, and points of interest all to a single quest journal entry. As you can see, this module is perfect for those of you game masters out there and players perhaps who love to have all of that information regarding journals, notes, quests, and locations and all that stuff all in one place for ease of access. But with that being said, let me know what you guys think in the comments. Do you like Simple Quest, or do you think it's pretty lacking when compared to some other quest giving or tracking mods that you may be using? I'm really curious to see what you guys think. But finally, we are here at the last mod of what I consider to be the most underrated mods made by the Ripper93, and this one is personally my favorite out of this bunch because it takes roles that deserve a little bit more epic flair and tension to them and gives them just that. This is the Epic Roles mod for D&D 5e. As the name suggests, this mod adds a super cool feature to Foundry's D&D 5e where you can wow your players with an awesome pop-up, sound effects, and visual effects for any kind of situation that demands an epic roll. To use this mod, all you have to do is click this little dice symbol above the chat box and select who you want to participate in this epic roll. You then choose what kind of skill you want your participants to roll for, then you determine the DC. And you also have a couple of other sliders right here that you can click to enable various options like being able to see the DC or the other participants' names or not. But anyways, once you're done setting up the role, you can choose to start the epic roll immediately, or choose to save the epic roll as a macro for later use if you're just prepping for an encounter. But regardless, once you decide to start an epic roll, this super cool looking banner flashes across the screen, accompanied by this awesome sound effect of beating drums, and the color of the banner for the epic roll changes depending upon what kind of a check it is. Additionally, a player can choose to roll with advantage or disadvantage depending upon the situation. And in the case where you want to change the sound effects for this mod, you can easily do so by going into the module settings and changing them, where you also have some other options that you can mess around with if desired. And that's pretty much it. And it may not seem like a lot, and by this point you may be thinking, wait, that's your favorite mod? Are you kidding? It's so simple. And yeah, I get that, but trust me, when you pull out this mod when there is a very tense situation or your players are on the edge of their seat, or maybe one of your players is trying to succeed at something that technically isn't in the rules, but you allow it through the use of a couple of rolls or maybe one very difficult roll and you pull out an epic roll prompt, your players will be giddy with excitement, especially when they see that epic success or failure flash across the screen. The only real downside to this mod is that it currently only works with D&D 5e, but I hope that eventually the Ripper 93 will port this over to other game systems or create a system agnostic version of it. But those were all of what I consider to be the most underrated or perhaps underutilized mods made by the Ripper 93, and I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, consider leaving a like and dropping a comment down below in regards to some of the mods that I covered in this video, or perhaps what you consider to be the most underrated mod made by the Ripper 93. But as always, everybody, thank you so much for watching, and I'll be sure to catch you in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.